Welcome back. In the last video, we actually discussed about data types, and in this video, we will be discussing the program structure in JavaScript. And when we talk about program structures, we talk about things like variables, we talk about things like different types of variables that we have. We talk about the building blocks of a program, which are like functions, talk about classes, we talk about loops that's control structures. We talk about loops, the different types of loops, talk about the while loop, the do while loop, talk about the for loop as well. So these are the different pieces that makes up a program. That's why we called the title of the video a program structure. And by the end of this video, from the things you've learned, you should be able to write your first program. And without further ado, let's dive in. And in this video, we'll start with what we call a constant, a variable actually. So we'll start with variables. And what are variables? So variables are basically bindings that store values. So basically, for me, I see variables as containers. I see variables as boxes that stores value. Imagine you are in a shopping mall and you want to buy oranges and you don't want to get just one orange, you want to get lots of oranges. And what do? You get a basket and you put your oranges in your basket. And using this basket, you can move these oranges within the shopping mall. The same concept applies to variables in JavaScript. They are basically bindings that allows you to store your values. And these variables, of course, have links to your computer memory. These are basically memory blocks or memory addresses in your computer memory. So yes, that is what bindings or variables are. And we have different types of variables. We have, the let, we have the const, and we have the var. So these are the three different ways by which you can create a variable. And let's start with the var. So for var, if we want to create a var variable, we use the keyword var. And let's say we want to create dogs. And let's say we call the variable dog. This variable dog is a variable that could contain any value. So let's just say puppy. And this variable dog, if you call it, or if you click enter, you should see, oh, sorry. If you console it, let's say console.log, and we call our dog variable, it returns puppy. And that is because, like I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video, variables contains our values. So this variable, which is the dog variable, can contain puppy, which is a string. It can contain numbers. It can contain functions, basically. And another one is known as the let. So if we want to create a variable using the let, we start with using the let keyword, the let keyword. And let's say let dog equals to puppy. And we print it to the console. And you will notice that, oh yes, so interesting. So the reason why we got this error is something I would still discuss later on in the video. Let's just go ahead. So let's use, since the error says dog has already been declared, let's use a different variable name. So let's say, let's use cat, or let's use monkey. Let's use monkey. So we associate a variable called monkey and we give it a gorilla. And let's try and console it. Let's print it to the console. Okay. And you notice it prints out. So the gorilla received this gorilla string to the monkey variable, and we'll try to log it to the console, and that's what we got here. And the last type of variable that we have is known as the constant. It's called the const, const. So let's say const building equals to duplex, and let's console it. Building, yes, we made a mistake in the spelling. I remember this is JavaScript, and what it means is it needs to be as correct as possible. If not, it throws an error. So building, English is hard. So yes, this is correct spelling for building, and it returns a value called duplex, basically, because we saved a value to building, we logged the building variable to the console, and it gave us the value back. And if you noticed at the beginning, when we were treating the var variable, we decided we wanted to create using the let, and we got an error that this identifier or this variable already exists. Now, it is important that I highlight the differences between the const, the var, and the let. And for consts are known as constants. So basically what it means is constants are unchangeable. Constants are created once and used everywhere. So you can't use, so constants are local to its context. They are local to its particular context. You can't use a constant declared in one file in a different place. So like, for example, let's say we wrap a constant in a function, which is something we'll still get to, and you try to access that constant outside that function, it won't work because constants exist within a specific local context or within a specific scope. And like I mentioned earlier, it is unchangeable. You can't change constants. You can't edit constants. Meanwhile, the left are also, they also exist within a particular scope, but the difference between the let and the constant is that let allows you to change a particular variable. So you can replace a value with another using let, while var basically allows you to, it exists within the local context, it allows you to edit, but most importantly, it exists within the global environment. So what I mean is, if you declare a a variable using var, the variable var would persist globally. So let's say we have a JavaScript file and multiple functions or multiple files, and we have var declared in one file, and we try to create var in another file, it won't work because this particular variable that we created using var already exists within the global scope. So basically, it is expected and it is advised that when you create your variables, you go for consts. You go for constants, because you wouldn't want a scenario where you create a variable and you mistakenly change that particular variable. It is something that would lead to bugs in your code. So I would advise you always go for const whenever you are creating variables. And that's about variables. Let's go to the next one, which is control structures. So when we talk about control structures, we talk about the flow of our program. And in control structures, there are different ways you can implement a flow in your program. So there is the most popular one, which is called a for loop. So a for loop basically works like this. So a for loop has the structure where it has an index, and then you have a binary operator that compares, that have some form of comparison. It says if index is less than bound, and then you have the increments. So that is how a for loop is structured. And let's try and do something with the for loop. Let's say we have an array, which is also a topic we'll come to in the future. Let's say we have an array of, let's say, an array of computers. And this computer array contains contains different brands like Lenovo, Apple, and let's see, HP. So this array contains the different brands of computers that you have, the different brands of laptops that you have. And what we would want to do is we would want to print out each of this individual item in the array and its index. So basically, from what we could see here, this is the first one, and we'll have the second one, and we'll have the third one. So we want to print each of these items alongside their index. And the way we do that is we use the for loop. So we say for index equals to 0 and index is less than or equal to computers, index increments. And for each of them, would console.log its index and would console.log the value as well. Oh, that's an error. Okay. And let's give it a shot. Let's run this program. Oh, sorry. This is meant to exist within a scope. I believe. Let let's add this in a function. Let's declare a function and let's call it laptop generator. And let's put the closing brackets. And let's call the function now. So if we run this program, oh wow, what's happening? Let's see. What these will have to put index if index is less than or equals to computers. Oh, sorry. I made a mistake. So it's meant to work with the length. So, and even without wrapping it in a function, it's meant to work as well. But let's leave it like this. So, by running this, you notice that it prints out the index and its value. So it prints out, so for each of the item in the array, it prints out an index and it prints out the value or the item in the array. And it does it for the first index, it does it for the second index, it does it for the third one. And because it doesn't, because because we used a condition here that says if it's less than or equal to the computers.length, that's the index is less than the length of the array. And from what we saw here, the length of the array is 3. So if it's less than or equal to the length of the array, which is 3, print this. So basically that is why it printed out the index, which is the 3, and it printed undefined because it doesn't exist. There no value exists after HP. There is no item within the array that exists after HP. So it turns undefined for the index of 3. So that is how you do control structures using for loop. And we have another one called the while loop. And the while loop works exactly as the for loop, but the difference is for while loop, it works like this. So for while loop, you have a condition, or more like a base function, a base condition that your operation depends on. And what do I mean by that? Let's say we have, let's say we want to print all of the number, or yes, let's say we have to print all of the numbers that are less than 10. You know, for all of the numbers less than 10, we want to print the number, and then we want to print the string number. I want to concatenate the string number to it as well. So let's say, so while 10 so the follows, let's create an index and let's assign the number 10 to it, and say while index 10, why the index 10, or let's call it 0. Let's assign it, let's call it 0 instead. So why the index is less than 10, while index is less than 10, console.log index and increment the index by 1. And running this program, oh yes, because it's a constant variable, it doesn't work. So let's change it to let, because basically what we're saying is we want to edit the values in this variable. So for us to edit, we can only use either let or var. And because we are using const, which is a constant, we can't edit the variable. So that is why it outputted this error. And let's do that and let's run it again. And it says identifier index has already been declared. And that is because we already declared an index, which is 0 here, and we forgot to clear the console. So it still references that. So let's call it a number index. So let's run it again. And it says, oh, sorry. I keep making little mistakes. And it's normal. It's normal in programming because in programming, you will make mistakes as well. So it is normal to make mistakes. So let's run this again. And as you have seen, it prints out our numbers from 0 to 9. And yeah, we can achieve the same thing that we did here using the for loop. It's the same thing. They are all control structures, but the difference is that for the while loop, you have to have a base condition declared like this, and then you have the results, or you have the operations to carry out. So they all do the same thing, but they have different ways of doing it. So for loop has its own way of doing it, while loop also has its own way of doing its own thing. And yeah, that's for control structures. And we have functions as well. And functions are basically values. In JavaScript, a function is a value, and functions are basically values that contains tiny pieces of code. So functions are values that contains tiny pieces of code. And a function can contain both a variable, it contains a control structure as well. So it's more or less like it's more or less like a container that packages other parts of your program into different pieces, So to declare a function, you use the function keyword, and you have you use the function keyword, and then you have parentheses, and you have your opening and closing brackets. So this is the way you declare a function. And in functions, there are different ways you can declare a function, or there are different types of functions. So the one I just declared now is called an anonymous function because it doesn't have a function name. So functions are meant to have a name, but this doesn't have a function name. So it is called an anonymous function. So if we should give this a name, if we say generator, generated gifs, it becomes a named function. It becomes a named function. And another way you could declare, or another type of function, is something we know as the arrow function. So arrow functions have this syntax. So basically, arrow functions have the syntax where you have a closing, opening and a closing bracket, and you have an arrow, and you have your notations, your anchor brackets notations. So basically, this is an arrow function. And the interesting thing, like I mentioned earlier, the interesting thing about functions is that they are values. So this function, I can decide to have this function assigned to a const, and I call it anom. And if I do the type of anom, sorry, if I do a type of anom, it tells me that, hey, this is a function. That is because we passed in this anonymous function to this variable anom. And the same way we passed this anonymous function, we can pass both named function, we can pass, of course, anonymous functions can be in both arrows or using the function notation. So it can pass any function of any type to a variable as a value. And yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, functions contains the pieces of your program. So a function can contain a variable. So let's say we declare a variable, say const, let's say const store equals to Primark, and by the way, let's rename this a normal, or let's say, let's call this Shopify. So we have const store, we have this as constant of store that contains the values, which is Primark. And let's decide, let's say we want to return a sentence that has this Primark store in it. Let's return statement that says I visited store. So if you noticed, we used a different notation this time. And you might be wondering, what are these two backticks? So these are called backticks, basically. It's what it is. It's called a backtick. And this is another way to represent strings. But these strings represented within a backtick can interpret a JavaScript operation. It can interpret a JavaScript notation, basically. So for example, like here we did I visited, and then we added this thing where we have like a dollar sign, and we have have like opening and closing anchor brackets, and then we'll have this variable in it. So basically, this as it is basically would return a value that says I visited Primark, and let's run it to see. Let's run it to see what it print. So running it, you should see that it already shows that, hey, I visited Primark. That is the great thing about functions. Functions basically help you to bundle the different pieces of your program. And yeah, with that, we've come to the end of this video. And I hope you learned one or two things about program structures and the different pieces that makes up a program structure. I hope you understand how the different types of variables work and how control structures work generally and the different types. And I also hope you understand how functions work and how to declare a function. And with that, thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video.